I'm Beaver Trapper in Birmingham, and in this segment of the show, I'm hopefully going to share with you lessons that I've learned in the School of Hard Knocks. Hello and welcome to the School of Hard Knocks. Tonight we're going to talk about storing beans and rice and why that may actually be the worst thing that you can do. That's right, the worst thing that you can do. Anytime I hear about people storing beans and rice, it usually is coming from what I would call newbie preppers. And that is people that don't have an established food storage plan, but they know that they need to do something. They're concerned about the current state of affairs. They know they don't have a food storage insurance program, and they've got to do something, and they don't have a whole lot of money to do it with. So what do? They run out to Sam's Club or Walmart, and they buy a couple of 50-pound bags of rice, a couple of 50-pound bags of beans, and they've convinced themselves that they now have food insurance. If questioned about their choice, they'll repeat the mantra of, hey, beans and rice, when eaten together, form a complete protein. They'll tell you about how people all over the world live off of beans and rice. All of that's true, but there's one problem with that. Americans don't. We don't live off beans and rice. In fact, these are nothing but excuses to justify the lack of a real food storage plan. These people that are storing the beans and rice, if you ask them if they've ever tried to actually live off beans and rice for a week, much less an extended period of time, well, the answer, of course, is no, they haven't. If you ask these people how they're going to cook their beans and rice, how long they're going to be able to cook them, how much fuel do they have stored, well, that's kind of an uncomfortable question to ask them. If you get a little deeper, when you broach the topic of menu fatigue, what recipes are you going to prepare with the beans and the rice? What spices do you have stored? What condiments do you have stored? What type of peppers? What type of onions? What type of tomatoes? All of that goes into the equation. And they usually don't have a very good answer for all that. The simple fact of the matter is that Americans are used to good food. We're a wealthy nation, and we're used to good food. In a time of stress or difficult circumstances, good food is going to be a very important psychological factor. There's a reason that crews on nuclear submarines get steaks. There's a reason why people who are climbing Mount Everest carry dehydrated trout almondine. They know that good food equals good morale, and bad food equals bad morale. Living on the Gulf Coast, I've lived through several hurricanes, and I can tell you from personal experience that having good tasting, appetizing, good looking, satisfying meals at the end of a day is huge. There's nothing worse than working hard all day long and suffering all day long, going without electricity, going without hot water, going without a hot shower, and then having to sit down to a bowl of plain beans and rice. Over time, it's going to send you over the edge. Now, I'm not saying don't store beans and rice. I store and I use them. But you need to make sure that you have a workable plan for these two staples. For instance, I make refried beans out of my beans. I use my Country Living grain mill and I grind my beans into flour, and I use the bean flour to thicken soups. Another thing to consider, if you're thinking about making beans and rice a mainstay of your food storage program, of your staples, I'd strongly urge you to consider lentils instead of beans, or lentils in complement with beans. Lentils are a lot easier to cook. They cook a lot quicker, they require a lot less fuel, they have a higher protein content, and they lend themselves to a greater variety of recipes and dishes. In fact, lentils are often called the poor man's meat. The bottom line on all of this is that most of the people that have run out and bought the cheapest 50-pound bags of beans and rice they could find would actually be better off with a couple of cases of MREs. MREs don't require any fuel. A case of MREs is a varied menu. They're portable, and they can be eaten on the run. None of that applies to plain beans and white rice. So you need to consider those factors. Another thought, and perhaps my final thought, is if you really have confidence in the food that you've stored, go spend the next week living off of it exclusively. And if you aren't willing to do that, you need to rethink about what you've stored. In future episodes, we'll talk about making your preps part of your day-to-day existence. And that's the ultimate goal. Your goal is to integrate your preps with your day-to-day existence to the degree that there's only going to be minor adjustments to make when the shit hits the fan, and not a major paradigm shift. So I hope this has provided you with some food for thought, and until next time, we'll see you. Good night.